The battle to intervene. Well, it's the third time I've been invited back to Australia, and it's no battle to come back, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here. I'd really like to thank Mustafa Taibi, who's worked extremely hard to get this organised. Found it very difficult to keep track of me. I've been a little bit wayward, but I'm here, we're here, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here with you. So, what am I going to be trying to talk about? Well, I think it's probably best if we begin, as it is Christmas, just a little...
Oh, well, in that case, I'll take them all, the whole lot. Just name your price, dear.
I'm afraid we can't give them up. Poor Perdita, she'd be heartbroken.
Hero, Mum. Indeed he was. A bloomin' hero.
On that point, I won't explain any more. But we might come back to this, seeing as it was Christmas. Competences, this is what we're talking about, key cultural competencies. What is a competence? Well, it's the ability to use what it is that you've learned. And this is what I really want to focus on, the ability to use what it is that you have learned. Whether it is the knowledge or the skills or other abilities, the competence is actually the proven ability that you can and actually will be actually doing that. And in the intercultural area, it's always to do with the difference. We should be experts, we are experts in noticing the gaps in the communication. And then we know how to handle those gaps according to those particular contexts. How we handle the gaps will depend on the context, in theory. Now, Taibi wrote a book, which I'm sure we've all read, in which he outlines some of the main features of what it is that makes a community translator a community translator. Key concepts, accessibility. It's for the weaker, the vulnerable, the outsider, usually in a minority language, tending to be of official texts, but the key area, of course, is to empower the reader, who is generally one who is a much more vulnerable area. So this is what the community translator, rather than another form of translator, should be most aware of. Now, I mentioned the abstract that I'll be using and making recourse to the logical levels model, and indeed, here it is. This is the iceberg. The iceberg, as we know, the tip of the iceberg is the tip, above the waterline. What's below it is what counts more, but it is, of course, more invisible. So, the three levels of the technical level, this is what we study, this is what we can read about, we can learn, and it gives us, in terms of a competence, we know what. Below the waterline, in the sense that you can't visibly see it or learn it in the same form of didactic way, is the know-how. It's the can-do. And this is very much learned through practice. And these are the things that we learn as we grow up, slightly more, Hall would say formally, in the sense that you follow the form, you do it this way, you don't do it that way, and you're able to do something. And this gives you the can-do type of competence. The one that I think is clearly most important, without which the rest can't really work, we can know them in theory, we can outline, we can know them in a theoretical form of practice, but we can't actually practice them unless we know why, and we have very strong understandings of the why, which are the core values, which allow us to actually do. So we know, we move from the what to do, to the how to do, to the actually we will do. And this is the area that I want to finalize, which is the will do. The first level is technical, the cognitive competencies. So we know, we can understand, and we formally, technically rather, in school, in university, through books, understand what it is that is to do with, in this case, cultural difference, because we're looking at the gaps. The second level, the formal, metacognitive competencies, where we analyze, we can synthesize, evaluate. These are the reflective. We can think about and we understand in a more creative way, in the sense that we have the strategies to do what it is that we want to do. The third level is that of the emotional competencies, and this is much closer to who we are, our own personalities, and it's these that drive the possible can-dos that then access the actual book learned instruction of what it is that we know. The emotional competence, perceiving, regulating and expressing emotions. Emotions being understood in a not just anger emotion, but in anything else which fuels doing or not doing. So we'll look at the first level first, the know, the understand and apply. And what I want to do is only concentrate on one or two key areas. Each of these clearly could be a talk in itself. Cultural locatedness, models the world, filtering, lingual culture, rich points, cultural grammar and orientations. Cultural locatedness, the easiest way is to think in terms of normality. What is normal? And I usually ask, and I asked last night, the group who was here last night, if there's anybody here who is not normal. Oh, we just have one. Incredible, the rest of us are normal, which is unusual in a group of intelligent people. Normality, it's really interesting. This was a picture that I took, and normal tea, what's inside? Tea, okay. Normal tea, what would you expect inside normal tea?
Tea leaves.
Hmm?
Tea leaves.
Tea leaves, coming from?
Tea tree. Tea bush.
Tea bush. Okay, and if somebody like me who's not an expert on tea, I'm in the supermarket, what tea would I be buying? Black tea. Okay, or green tea? Or white tea? Okay, we're already getting some differences here. Now if I said, okay, this is normal tea, we automatically bring to mind the other. So what is the other tea?
Herbal tea.
Purple?
Herbal.
Herbal.
Mint or chamomile or...
Chamomile? Okay. Makes sense. Herbal tea. Any other alternatives? Mate. And this tells us a lot about our cultural locatedness. That was the other tea. Where are we? South Africa. Yes, the university in South Africa, and I suddenly saw normal tea. What is the other? And they went, well, obviously. But it wasn't obvious. But that was the cultural locatedness. And it's a very strong but very simple understanding of the power of the word. The word itself, of course, has a whole culture that goes with it. And recently people have been talking about the idea of these tangles, these rhizomes, and talking about culture as a rhizome, which is a very nice descriptive way of what happens when you pull up a word and you can't just pull it up on its own. It comes with it a history of other concepts. So the normal, the rubosh, but what's under that is a whole series of other possible contexts and connotations. And quite suddenly these very simple terms become extraordinarily deep and what Agar calls rich points. So here's just an example. Here's a term, conclusively. It's not a very complex term. Clearly we're in the area of scientific or other forms of formal discourse. We tend not to use the term conclusively in general conversation. And in fact we're in the area of medical talk. And in medical talk, we understand that we're looking at the world of science and we're looking at causes and effects. And as scientists and writing about science, in particular medicine, we're very careful about using the term conclusively because If we are conclusive, this does suggest that we have 100% knowledge, understanding of what it is we're talking about. It's a very cautious science, medicine, because we don't know all the causes. We don't yet know. What we do know, or what we do believe, is that there's a physical or tangible cause. So the fact that we don't know doesn't mean that the cause is not knowable, but the cause is yet to be known. So far, so good in this tangle of concepts of the idea of conclusively. But this is in Western and certainly Anglo-English construct of the term conclusively. But if we go not very far from here to indigenous understanding of science and the term conclusively, for a start, your doctor knows. There is no we don't know. Doctors know. It's a much more certain science. There is no fuzziness. And this is Trudgeon speaking. According to junior thinking, if a sickness, a disease or death has no clear physical cause, then someone must be doing sorcery. If you leave space, that space in the tangle of things gets taken up with sorcery. So the suspicion of sorcery can only be ruled out when a clear intellectual reason can be seen as the cause of the problem. Any fuzziness, we don't know, is cause for suspecting foul play. And he documents cases of people dying because of the suspicion of foul play and the non-trust of Western science, Western doctors. So if you look at fuzziness that is in medical discourse and just look at the websites of what's used, and you think with a different way of thinking of the term conclusively, with this new tangle of constructs and connotations, and you begin to read, although so far no causal link has been conclusively established, at which point the tangle takes you somewhere different, because if it's not conclusive, sorcery is going on. The rest of the information is lost, because the mind is already taking you to the fact that the conclusiveness is not with the doctor. The manufacturer cannot conclusively determine. When the cause of the device's failure has not been conclusively determined, it appears, but what appears is lost. So the question, of course, is, in this fuzziness and as a community translator, what do you do? And the obvious thing is that you cut the conclusiveness. Otherwise, you move on to a different tangle of connections. And clearly, if you're giving the form to the patients, which gives recommendations for treatment, an explanation of what it is that's going on in your body, and you have a symptom, you have a problem, you go to the hospital, and you get this recommendations form, and it says, please circle the appropriate recommendation. Unfortunately, what's written is, the cause of this problem has not been conclusively determined, at which point your mind is going elsewhere. And however, the low level of occurrence is not currently cause for concern. But this gets lost because you're taking a different route and you're going along a different way of thinking. And it is therefore in itself not a useful recommendation for a group of people who have a thinking pattern, a model of the world that takes them to a different area. Moving on from words and concepts to cultural grammars, North African languages, with the split ergative, you have a real problem of who is in charge. And here is a verbatim report talking about the journey to Italy and what it is that happened. The traffickers, the human traffickers, are not mentioned in the report. And what happens is, if you don't mention the people who are doing the job, it sounds as if you're trying to avoid police investigation. So the car picked us and carried us to Niger. There, a van brought us to the desert. The truck found the way. There are no people involved. There are no traffickers involved. It sounds as if The migrant is doing his or her best to protect the people who were responsible for the trafficking, which is what the police are looking for. So the migrant is not helping him or herself in getting asylum by concealing who it is who has been taking them and transporting them. They're not going to get their asylum. Question is, what does the translator do? There's a lot of responsibility. But that's the first level, the technical. We know about these different worlds, we learn about them, we understand they have different ways of constructing reality, therefore the language they use to talk about their reality is significantly different. And the worst thing we should be doing is translating. Moving on to the second level, the formal level, the metacognitive competencies, where we have areas of mind shifting and mediation. And this is where this fits in. This we can learn how to do, and we can become experts in this. And I'll just give you an example of what I mean. The idea of perceptual positions, there are three perceptual positions. The first perceptual position, this is where you are projecting yourself, is the text. The example that's often used for thinking about perceptual positions is the film Jaws, which was a long time ago, but maybe we could watch it again at Christmas. If you remember, and so watch it with your children, you'll remember that the first position is when you are the shark. So as the shark, you are looking at the vulnerable legs of the swimmer. That is the first position. You are the shark, so you don't see the shark. That is a bit like saying you are the text. You are inside the text, you're inside the grammaticality of the text, inside the language of the text. And that's the first position within the source context of culture. The second position is you are the reader. So going back to the Jaws film, you are the swimmer. You see the shark. Very different. But first of all, the shark sees the swimmer's leg, and the camera position turns. You are the swimmer, and you see the shark. You react. So as a reader, you react to the language in the text. And hopefully it's not terrifying, but you get into the position of the reader in that particular context, whether it's indigenous reader or not, and you understand what it is that's going on between them. Clearly, each time there is a context, which will be a text type, there'll also be a purpose that's going on, scopus. And I like to use a set of terms which comes from Greimas, vouloir, savoir, and pouvoir faire. No different to many other taxonomies of text typology. Very often they're in an I, you, he. The vouloir is the attractiveness. So I, as a reader, am attracted to the text. So this is text which may be more promotional, more colourful, and will be less dense. The savoir is knowledge, a text which is designed to be informative, more objective, will then be more dense, more detailed, more complete. The pouvoir faire, this is very interesting, because the pouvoir faire is the text that enables the reader to read as if they were the first source text readers, which is the object of translation, or in my book, should be. So that the readers should be able to have the effects, the emotions, the knowledge, the information that they would have got had they been first source text readers. So the second perceptual position is the reader. You are the reader. You understand what the reader's key concerns are. where the reader is coming from, what sorts of tangled understandings, rhizomic associations they're going to make from the text that they read. And then, of course, the culture shift, where the new reader, by complete chance, is called Mustafa, total chance, who comes from Tangier. And you are now the new reader. And you understand where that reader is coming from, what that reader's key concerns are, what is manifest, what is obvious, what is normal for this new reader, and what is not normal for this new reader. So you were able to make these shifts. And then, of course, the third perceptual position, going back to Jaws, we're the director of the film. We can see what it is that's going on between this original reader and this original text, this new reader and this new text, which is yet to be created. At which point, in theory, we can do the mediation. And this mediation is very much to do with the central competence. I very much like Pym's definition of the central competence translation, the ability to generate a series of more than one viable target text. So as translators, we automatically come up with possibilities, and there's a feel of this one, maybe no, this works, and let's move down this one, this works, this is more. The way it should be going with this particular new reader and this particular new text. Regarding this source text, but what's really interesting is the ability to select only one viable target text from this series quickly, because clearly our commissioners do not want us to wait. We need to be fast. And with justifiable or justified confidence, and we'll come to the justified confidence towards the end. How do we do this? This is at the second level, formal level, where we learn a toolbox of alternative strategies. We're competent translators. We have a toolbox of possibilities. Or if we're the doctor, the surgeon, we have a toolbox of procedures. And we have a variety of possible ways of intervening on the patient. And we pick one of these with justified confidence. And we have, because we've learned, because we've experienced, a variety of creative mediation strategies where we will omit, we may translate literally, we may generalize, we may give alternatives, we may even give footnotes. There are many other ways in which we can intervene on the text, which in theory we can do because we're in this third perceptual position. But this requires the ability to disassociate, to move in and out of one text, to move in and out of another text, but it also means that we need to be able to move in and out of our negotiations with the other creative people, the agents, the commissioners, the public. There are many other forces that we need to interact with, and we need to be able to disassociate and associate effectively with a large number of agents, where we're thinking of what our virtual text will be and what our new reader will make of this virtual text. And this is great in terms of theory. So the interventions at these two levels, however, for the interventions to take place, and this is where I really want to focus on, we need the emotional competencies, perceiving, regulating, and expressing emotions. We need healthy doses of empathy, of understanding different points of view, the text, the readers, the cultures, but also these various other actors. We also need to be able to deal with, handle uncertainty management. We need to be able to deal with the fact that we are in between a number of different factors, texts, readers, commissioners, and others. who are all competing for our, and also competing against our interests, which of course takes us to the final level, that of assertiveness. And this is what I think we will find is one of the key areas to do with the ability to do and the fact that we will do. So in terms of competencies to do with the emotions, what do community translators as mediators already do? The things we already know about if we talk about emotional competence. We generally seem to be, or we believe we should be, strong on perceiving the emotions and on regulating the emotions. And this is to do with the feelings. We have, or we should have, very strong trait, empathy. We should ideally, out of all the translators there are, community translators, empathy, because we're here to empower the vulnerable. We're here to look after the needs of those who can't look after themselves, who need help. This is us. This is what we do. So the trait empathy, which, and here you've got a list of factors to do with emotional intelligence, and trait empathy, capability of taking someone else's perspective, going back to Jaws, this is where we should be very strong. This would mark us out as a different form of translator, possibly, or at least this is our core business. Clearly also, because we're in the middle of so many different things that are going on, we need to be a rock. And the capability of controlling our own emotions, self-effacing, the invisibility to a large extent. We need, as a director, to allow the film to take place. We need the actors to do their thing, and we allow them to do it. We orchestrate a little from the background, and this is the problem. The intervention gets a little difficult if we are constantly taking other people's perspective and not our own perspective. So, controlling our own emotions, reflective, as I mentioned before, that metacognitive level is very much to do with considering, certainly as translators, considering the right, the best, is key concern to us, and to do a good job, rather like an artist or a sculptor. We would like to spend more time on the texts, if we could. So, reflective, less likely to give in to their urges. We tend to be self-effacing in that sense. And flexible, willing to adapt to new conditions. We tend to react to others telling us what to do, whether it's what the price is, or the timing is, or how to translate is. We tend to be following others, a very submissive, a very subservient group. Many others have written and talked about translation as being a very subservient. And this is what we do well, and it's absolutely necessary. However, somebody should intervene and not be only on the back watching what it is that's going on. And I want to give you a couple of cases which is, in a certain sense, nothing to do with translation, but should have a lot to do with translation. This is an Italian, the form that's given to anybody who moves from one residence to another, and it's the first form that's given to an immigrant when they move into a particular district and they need to register themselves at the police station. The first thing you will notice is that the form is in Italian, which is clearly not the first language of 100% of the migrant arrivals. What is interesting is that this form is the standard form that is given to the hundreds of thousands of new residents, most of whom are migrants, if not all are migrants, and this has been the case up to the year 2019, December the 13th. And this is what is interesting. If you look at this form, you can see how well it's been filled in. As you can see, you've got some information is filled in, but not very much. And we took 13 forms, and as you can see, how much has been filled in. Surname has always been filled in correctly, the name has been filled in correctly, more or less the date of birth as well, but as we go down, so less and less of the information is filled in. And understandably not filled in, because the complexity of the 6 pages is beyond most of my Italian students to translate. I give them this to translate into English, and they can't, because they themselves don't understand. And I asked the people I was staying with in Sydney before what information they knew about the house they were living in, which is the very first one, the Esse Proprietario, and to give me the lot details. And they went, lot details? And I said, yes, somewhere you'll have them. They looked on the computer and they finally, after 15, 20 minutes, got the information that was the equivalent. But if you're renting, there are 4 different renting possibilities here. There are details that most of us have never even thought of that are required by law. And that's not translated. Now the Dean, right at the very beginning this morning, said that everybody has the right to be able to converse, particularly with officials in a language that they can understand. And they simply can't. And this is the year 2019, not the year 1946. If we go to South Africa, notice of rights in terms of the Constitution, which is a fairly complex term in itself. We probably understand what it means. But almost 70% of South Africans don't actually speak English. It's not their mother tongue. English is one of the 11 national languages. So, although English is a national language, it is not the language of the local population. Now, if you end up going to the police station, which of course is a frequent, unfortunate possibility, the first thing that happens when you go to the police station in South Africa is you get given this form and it is orally given to you. Now, it fills the whole screen. It is impossibly complex. And it begins with, you're being detained for the following reason, and the reason is given. This is a genuine form. This was shoplifting. As a person arrested for the alleged commission of an offence, you have the following rights. And as you can see, it goes on and on and on. Whoever we are, if we end up in a police station, we're not in a happy place. And if we're being detained for a possible alleged commission of an offence, whatever our language skills are, we're not going to get our heads round what is an alleged commission. When I first heard this, I could not understand what an alleged commission is. This is South Africa, and in theory, 11 official languages. In practice, English. And the English that is used for anybody who ends up in a police station is this: somebody should intervene. Somebody should be fighting for the rights of those who have to read this or have been given this orally, to allow them to understand it in a language that is more germane to them. So who translates when translation does take place? Well, this is Terence Khan, who's done a lot of work in the University of South Africa exactly on this, and he's writing a paper on the alleged commission. So he wrote to me, because I said, I'm coming to Australia, tell me what actually happens. And he says, well, I've asked police and wardens at correctional services what they do when a translation is requested. And they simply translate the documents verbally when necessary. And this happens in Italy, I know, exactly the same thing. I'm sure this happens worldwide. Somebody should intervene, so that we can work effectively as a community translator. And there are examples of intervention that does take place, which is great. Here's a very good example. It's a paper that was written about the translation of validated smoking relapse prevention booklets for use with Hispanic populations in America. The original booklets, which were there to help you stop smoking, and a relapse once you've given up smoking, which were originally in English, were translated for the Hispanic populations, so translated into Spanish. Fine. What's really interesting was the comments. We felt a literal translation of the Forever Free booklets would not suffice. Excellent. Because new reader, new context, new understandings. And this is very much a vouloir, so I need to be attracted to continue reading. I need to be attracted towards not smoking, so we have to push the buttons that work to stop me going back to smoking again. Booklet was originally written for a particular class and group of people in America, and the new booklet, which was very successful, realized that the intended audience was very different, realized, and this is the language they used, that the tone had to be changed, the vocabulary had to be simplified. So if we're translating those official documents, we don't translate. The first thing we do is we simplify. The photos were changed. Instead of white, middle-class Americans, they were clearly more Hispanic photographs of Hispanic families. I'm more attracted. The vouloir works, and I'm more likely to continue reading. I'm more likely to give up smoking. Key concepts were used, the familismo. So family photographs showing the stress of family life compared to the American ones, which showed the stress of working, sitting in a car in a long line of traffic, would help you wanting to smoke again. So they changed all of these. And what it is that helps you go back to smoking were changed. So it was a fundamental rewrite in this translation. In fact, they actually said, thus we employed methods of transcreation. So translatere, transcreare, transcreate, in which the text is reconstructed to meet the health, literacy and informational needs of the group, as well as being translated and culturally adapted. Somebody is doing an excellent job. This is brilliant and a wonderful thing to see. Until you realise who's creating the text. These are the people who created the new text. Researcher, clinical professor, researcher, investigator, professor of psychology. The translator? Yes, a certified bilingual translator began by completing the direct text translation from English to Spanish. Not good news. And this is unfortunately the situation that many of us fully understand. This is not new, this information. This is how the market sees the translator. This is what the translator does. Somebody else creates the text for the new reader, for the intended audience, makes the changes, not the translator. So this will do, this ability to select from a series quickly and with justified confidence, isn't yet where the community translator is. This ability to leave the source text and make the changes, get out of the comfort zone of sticking to the literal translation, is unfortunately something which is germane to the translating community. I did a survey of translators in the world and got 894 completed the survey, of which only a very few were clearly community translators. But I just want to show you one or two things from this. Of course, there is a problem. What is a community translator? And I'm not talking about that. The people I picked were those who worked in immigration, public services, medical health, but also legal and court. And I know that not necessarily are these always community translators. But there was a group of 25, which is not a big group. What was interesting, it was a very cohesive group. How well did they distinguish themselves as a group with core interests that were different to the general group of professional translators? And there were a number of questions. This is one of the questions, and it is, if the job is considered to be a good linguistic transfer of the original, to what extent is the translator concerned with reader reaction? How many said, always, this is my core business. When I translate, I'm always interested in that shark-swimmer relationship and what it is the swimmer is going to think when she sees the shark coming. Ideally, and of course, in reality. As you can see, ideally, always was only just over 50%. Bizarre that it was not core business. And of course, very little different, no difference between the small group of 25 and the big cohort. Opening this to always and very much, things got a lot better. So, always and very much. Here we've got 80-90%. It's not bad. Not bad. But it's not 100%. Nevertheless, ideally, yes, 80-odd% of our work should be dealing with reader reaction. But if you're a director of a film, could you imagine a director of a film going, the audience, well, make of it what they like. I'm not really concerned with them. I'm making a film. Okay, an art film, possibly, but not a film that's going to be watched. Of course, the reality is very different, and this constrained in reality. So in theory, I would like to be considering the reader, but actually, most of the time, or at least a significant part of the time, there is a constraint, and I can't, for a variety of reasons. Where is your prime loyalty? Well, as experts tell us, there is a dilemma of whose perspective to take. Is it the source text? Is it the authors, the commissioners? So there is this tangle at the very beginning of where I should be, this uncertainty of where my loyalty lies. And we need to be strong in warding off this barrage of different ways that we are pulled. So who are we loyal to? When the first survey I asked, in your opinion or experience, where is the main loyalty when you translate? Original text, the reader, or the commissioner? And these were the results. And as you can see, there is no difference whatsoever between the two cohorts. And unsurprisingly, the most important prime loyalty is to the original text, followed very closely by the reader. Interestingly, the commissioner is a fairly low third. We know who we are loyal to. But what is very interesting is the next point, is that public service translators have the right and obligation to find a balance between formal equivalence and communicative efficiency based on each context. This is that third position. I'm the director of this particular scene, and I'm working out the scene, and I'm deciding where I want the picture to come from. Is it the shark? Is it the swimmer? What is it that I want to happen? Do I want to stimulate a vouloir? Do I want to give information? Do I want to enable the reader? I make the decisions based on each particular context. So the fourth question, fourth point was, apart from these three, what about if we add a fourth? Which is, well, it depends. Meaning, I decide. I make my translation choices, which may oscillate between all the above at any given moment. Now, you would hope that as translators, you would go for the fourth, because I am in that third position. I make those decisions. So you've got the original text, You've got the reader, you've got the commissioner, and you've got it depends. And the first thing you can see is, well, there isn't a big difference. The it depends is probably the fourth loyalty. And it's even lower than the all groups. So the public service translator seems to be even less able to make the decisions about who to be loyal to. And as we got, original text is obviously the first, the reader, the commissioner, and the least loyal is to me, myself. I am not in charge of what it is that's going on. And indeed, most translators tend to take a very cautionary approach towards translating community brochures. It's the safe way. We stay within our comfort zones. Why? Well, the comments that the translators gave, we're very aware of. I'm a translator. It's not my responsibility. I'd rather keep to the original. What if I just phrases? I might transcript on occasion, but I feel a little guilty. And I'll try to make it sure it's absolutely justified. It's not where we feel our role or our personality lies. And of course, it is difficult. The whole world is against us. There's a very important organisation here, which I'm very aware of there, and it has standards. 5.2 by this very august organisation here. Interpreters and translators do not alter, add to, or omit anything from the content and intent of the source message. The original text is sacred. The shark is sacred. The reader, the swimmer, forget the swimmer. That's not part of the deal. We only deal with the text. So this is where the battle is. The battle is very much in terms of assertiveness and the need to show that we are also in charge. The ability to move from knowing what to knowing how to actually doing lies in this area of emotional intelligence, the ability to stick with the core ideas and follow them through. So what we need more of are the other areas of emotional intelligence. The esteem. I believe I can. I am worth it. This is what I do. So the self-confidence that is not in those comments of I feel guilty, it's not really my job. Emotion management, not of myself, but of others, capable of influencing other people's feelings. This is not a core competence that is taught, that is thought of as being what we should be doing, but I believe it should be, if we want the profession to grow as a profession. Assertiveness. Forthright, frank, and willing to stand up for their rights. This is something that we tend not to focus on. And self-motivation, driven and unlikely to give up in the face of adversity. So I'd like to give you an example. It's not in community translation, but it's a genuine example of the sorts of battles that take place and the benefit of taking part in the battle. I have a very good colleague who's an Italian-English translator. She's got 35 years of experience. As you can see, she's got a number of qualifications after her name. As professional translators go, she's up there, an official European Union translator. She's also a member of the Society of Authors because she's actually written a book of her own. Not bad for a translator. And she wrote to me on the 18th of April 2016. To me, I'm David. Hello. Subject, use of the effing historical present in Italian. Effing is a technical word in grammar books, you can look it up. Historical present, probably we can understand. And this is what she wrote. I've had my last 2 book translations back from the editors with all my past tenses changed back to the present, and I'm tearing my hair out. Why? Here is an extract that she sent me, and it's about a woman called Turgid, a German who was a proto-feminist. And there's the Italian, and it's her translation. So Turgid had a fairly standard schooling for women at that time, but then became one of the few to then go and study history. She graduated. Nothing wrong with that. Yes, there was a lot wrong with that, because it came back corrected by the commissioners, the editors. And so she was stuck with this new translation, proofread by others, and they said, no, it has to be Turgid has a fairly standard schooling, she graduates. Now in English, it's possible. We use the historic present. The question is, who's directing the show? Who decides? So this was the problem. So the translator wrote to the editor, "Hi, commissioning editor. In response to your letter, read the chapter. I've noted the comments about the use of the present tense to indicate an event that took part in the past are more tricky. I hope the author will not be offended, the author is alive, but I need to make it clear from the start that I want to do my utmost to produce a good translation. It's also proofread by a second English mother tongue translator, and it must read as though it is not a translation, but instead written as a piece of original English text. The question is not so much if this is the right approach. The question really is who's directing the film, who's in charge." So, the editor wrote to the publisher. So, to Rome and Littlefield publishers, because the editors were in Italy, from the Italian commissioning editors, and this was copied into the email. So, they wrote, "Hi, trusted publisher, how are you? We would like your advice on the translation of this book. While the author uses the historical present tense throughout the volume, our translator is using the past tense. We trust our translator, but the original Italian author would like to maintain the original style of the book, which characterizes her work." So you have the battle. Who's in charge? The original author, the commissioning editors, the publishers, or the translator? So the original author vetoed the translation, wants it in the present simple because she wants it to be vivid and immediate. She wants it to read like a narrative. So since this is an important point for both of them, could you make the decision? So Rowman and Littleford publishers in London were asked what they thought. Hi, not really trusted translator, I'm sending the response of our publisher because they are directing things. And thankfully, they concurred with the translator. We prefer the past. So I have discussed it with highly trusted author, and she agrees to continue with the past tense as you had suggested. So the battle is incredibly strong. Here's mother tongue translator battling with the Italian author to get English as the translator wants. She appreciates, this is the author, all this and thought you're putting into work and she'd like to continue the translation. Of course. Well, okay, you can hear the lack of course, but nevertheless, the battle was won. So to finish up, as one of the respondents in my survey said, be resilient and assertive and conscious of your work, because you too can become a blooming hero. Thank you very much.